So this is the third Data Dragons meetup of the year, and today we are going through the World Happiness Report. So I wanted to start off by just doing a really basic overview of what is the premise of the data. So within the data set itself, there's a basic mathematical model which states that happiness, or what is known as the ladder score within the dataset, is a function of the logged GDP per capita, as well as the life expectancy, the freedom to make choices, social support, 2 seconds, generosity, and perceptions of corruption. Note that perceptions of corruption is negatively correlated as less is preferred to more. So that's essentially the mathematical model underpinning the sum of happiness. And if you look within the data set itself, you'll see that there are attributes known as explained by, and each of them contributes to a lesser or greater extent. So let's go through some of the more basic things before I show you the actual dashboard that I built. Cool. Okay. So some of the more basic statistics. So the average is about 5.54, and the scale runs from 1 to 10. So how they collect the data is that there is a Gallup survey that goes out every year. And for that survey, they basically send it out to around about 1,000 people in each country. Now, it's based on waves. So for that 1,000 people, you have they rank themselves on a variety of questions, and these are all related to the different categories. And from there, they basically average it out to figure out as a representative sample for that country. And with Finland coming out at the top, and then Afghanistan coming out at the bottom. Note that only 138 countries are within the data set, even though the world has 195 countries in total. And obviously there are notable exceptions, including Somalia, and like North Korea isn't in there, a couple of other places in Africa, as well as obviously Antarctica, which has basically no one. Cool. So the first question I obviously asked was, how does happiness vary across regions? And as we can see, Africa got a much lower score in compared with places like Oceania, which is basically Australia, New Zealand, those types of places. And then, of course, Europe, North America, and then South America as well. However, then you also have to go look at the makeup across the different countries. So then I compared it with the countries in our actual data set versus the actual count of the number of countries within the continents. So in our data set, we have 37 countries of Africa versus the 54 that actually make up the entire continent. And for Oceania, even though they are the highest ranking, there are only 2 out of the 14 countries which are present. So you can't really say it's that representative. And then so that was a bit of a struggle to really conceptualize. And then the same with North America. There were a lot of countries who were discounted or not included in the data set. Cool. So elements of the model and their effect on happiness. How does life expectancy correlate with happiness? So, of course, more life expectancy is preferred to less. And the way they calculate life expectancy, and you can read more about this in the way the Gallup score was calculated, is effectively they went and researched average birth and death. So the number of people who have died upon their, basically when they're infant deaths per mortality, and then as well as the average age for life expectancy that you could basically expected as within the different countries as well as between them. Unfortunately, they didn't do this across income groups, which would have been interesting, but because within different countries you have various life expectancy rates across your income groups, so that is one critique of the model. Then the correlation between log GDP per capita and happiness. This one was pretty straightforward. It's obviously got a positive correlation because if your citizens, by the way, if you don't know, GDP per capita is GDP per person within the country. So more is obviously preferred to less. So in essence, some of the countries have much higher than lower, and I'll show you the actual dashboard now where we can see within continents and regions how this translates. Okay, I'll get more into the dystopia now, but dystopia and the normative happiness scores, dystopia was based on the idea of a fictionalized country, which would be the worst country in the world. And the fictionalized country has the worst life expectancy, the worst GDP, the worst everything. And it's basically comparing that GDP or that happiness score rather with the scores of the whatever the country is. So the dystopia had about 1.78, and then the normative happiness scores were around 5.4 on average, with Finland being like 7. Okay. And perceptions of corruption do correlate negatively with there, because obviously the higher the corruption, the lower or the higher you are perceived to have corrupt government and corrupt institutions, the lower your level of happiness. Okay, and some of the criticisms of the model is that they didn't really include things like perceptions of upward mobility, unemployment levels, and things like that, or just the time spent working versus the time spent in leisure. Because happiness is abstract and difficult to measure, but there are many other corresponding variables. And when I see things like GDP per capita, especially as someone who studied economics for many years, uh, while it's true money is very important, there are some countries like the US, and especially as we find for people who are high income earners, they actually end up working more. So that is something that would have been interesting to investigate. And then the lack of the countries from the global south or from more developing nations, you'll see that most of the countries, when you look at the map just now, are in well-developed areas. So I don't know if there was just a struggle to get data from them for the Gallup survey or what the reason was, but it was a bit disconcerting to see that. Okay, let me show you. Would you like to ask any questions or give any comments now, or should I continue with this? Okay, I'm going to continue. Cool. So this is the WHR data visualized. So this dashboard is within Looker Studio, which is basically Google's data studio, just slightly refined. And there is, on the home dashboard, we have the average happiness score, the minimum happiness score, and the maximum happiness score as just static cards. And then we have a scale of happiness across the world. With the darker the shade of red, the higher the happiness. So you'll see if you zoom in slightly that like it adjusts, and like Sweden and Finland and Norway are much happier than like Ukraine, and like Belarus had no data, Libya had no data. And then obviously as you go down, like DRC has a much lower score than like South Africa. Okay. And then the number of countries included for each continent composition for our data set, as well as the average score for the continents and how they vary in relation. And then we look at the correlations, and we can see how the positive correlations are for them. And like there was a much weaker correlation for generosity and happiness score, which I thought was a bit odd. And then obviously the correlations between freedom to make life choices. And then we can filter out to say like only Europe, for example. And then this is how that looks. Okay. Cool. And now we look at the impact the variables have on happiness rankings. So there is about 5 or 6 columns which work at as explained by, and this shows the impact of each variable on the ladder score. And some of them are much more important than others. So you'll see that log GDP per capita and social support work out as a higher percentage of it than, for example, generosity, which actually explains the correlation model. So if we look at this, we'll end up increasing the importance of those, which means that they've obviously, the social scientists and the data scientists within the World Health Report team have decided or have come to the conclusion that these are the most important contributing variables and that these have like the greatest value going forwards. Okay, so this is typically how we would go forth and conduct further research and attempt to figure out why these are the most important things. So obviously social support, you could say this is a social safety net, such as the welfare programs, and the GDP per capita can be taken as a proxy for like upward mobility that I announced earlier, or just for the citizens' ability to take care of themselves. Whereas generosity might be something that is much more difficult to predict or to assume. So that's probably why it's discounted so much. Yeah. And then as for the perceptions of corruption, I wonder if that's just because of the fact that some of these areas have very low perceptions of corruption, but that might be incorrect because Africa got kind of high perceptions of corruption there, and yet it's much smaller within the model. So yeah, so that is what I had for today. I don't know if you guys would like to share what you have, or if you would like to give any comments or feedback. Hi, Lomwabo.
Hi, Celestine. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm glad you're here. I know this was
Yeah,
your first one.
yeah. No, sorry for joining late. Also, I actually forgot that I didn't saw it actually click on the attend button, so I just got the invite now.
Okay, okay.
Um, but yeah, no, this was quite cool. Will we get a link for this after the call?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Would you mind just going back to the first part? I think there's the part where you were preparing the data. I think there's some things that you did just to, I guess, make it usable.
Okay, I'll show the data now. It is this is our World Happiness Report. So the only when I downloaded this data off of the website, it was, I think I got it off of Kaggle. This is kind of how it came. And the main thing that I did here is that because it is a beginner challenge, I didn't want to pick anything that required too much cleaning. The only thing that I really did was I went and found all the continents relevant for each country. The actual scores were in the correct format. There was no great cleaning needed like for other. And there were no spelling mistakes for the countries either. So yeah, this was quite a nice data set actually to work with in comparison to many others. Everything was well done for you in advance.
Okay, and then just the parts where it says explained by. Do you happen to know why it was? I know this might be like a silly question. Just as something when I looked at the data and what like just from in
Oh,
onwards, like
okay.
what do they mean by?
Okay, so each explained by is effectively the percentage or like how much of the happiness score can be explained by that particular factor. So these are the individual scores for things like, or the individual values for things like GDP per capita in terms of logs, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices. That was on a scale of 0 to 1. Generosity, that was also on a scale. And then perceptions of corruption, also on a scale of 0 to 1. So then what happens is that they go and say, what amount of this score, this happiness score, which is in the ladder score column, is explained by this value or by that value. the social support.
Oh,
You
okay.
can't add it up to get it to exactly the same amount because there is some deviation, but
Mm,
this is which is captured in the residual, which is why we have that there.
mm. So it's basically like how much is it? How much is a certain
Yeah.
uh, data point
It's how
influenced
much
by?
of the happiness score can be explained by each of the factors.
Oh, okay, cool. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Then Celestine, just another question in the data there. There's columns for upper whisker and lower whisker. What does that refer to?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys know what a whisker plot is.
No.
Mm-mm.
A box
Okay.
and whisker plot.
Yeah, let me get a photo, an image of it for you. It's a type. Here you go. So this is a whisker plot. It is a type of a statistical plot, and here you can see the median value, and then the lower whisker, and then the upper whisker. So when they are building your happiness score, they're almost looking for within this box, and then these are around here would be what they would call the deviations. So if we were to go back now to here, when they were building the statistical model for each of these countries' happiness scores, they went and said, okay, this is where we find like the median or the most true value of the happiness score for Finland. And then this is the upper whisker, so what the upper bar of what it could be, and this is the lower whisker or the lower bit of the box of what it could be. And then they chose the middlemost value.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
16, can I try presenting?
I'm sorry?
May I try presenting?
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carlo, not Daniel Topolsky. This was just one of my Google accounts. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
Cool. So, I mean, definitely not high on the visuals, but this is what I tried. You can't buy happiness, but having money helps meet your basic needs. First, I did a baseline of just a basic map to plot the happiness scores. Yeah, I think the previous question that was asked about how do we group the countries by continent is definitely something that I'm interested in. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll probably ask about that later though. And then I looked for things for correlations basically. So in this, I just included things that had a relationship of some sort, or at least I thought. But on the thread of money buying happiness, there seems to be a relationship between GDP and happiness. However, the relationship between GDP and generosity is not so clear. So just because people are earning lots of money doesn't necessarily mean that they'll give money away, which I disagree with. I don't think that's how things should be because there seems to be a relationship between happiness and social support. So maybe if we could, I don't know, not generosity, but divert some of that GDP money toward social support, we could make people happier. There also seem to be well, not very strong, but at least something with freedom to make life decisions and social support. So if we can get that social support going, then people have more freedom to make life choices. And hopefully we'll be able to increase life expectancy. Um, and yeah, with that, overall general world happiness. Yeah, that's kind of all that I have.
That was so cool. Thank you so much. Yeah. I like the thing between generosity and GDP. I had not investigated that. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes sense considering the fact that statistically, if you tell people how well they are off, they are less likely to be generous. It's a known factor in charities. So,
That's
yeah,
interesting. Cool.
yeah.
I
Can
was
you
just
explain how you group the countries by continent?
Oh, okay. So there are two ways. One, you can manually go and create a column in Excel or Google Sheets, or even in Power BI. There's like ability to add data there, and then you can go and type in each of them. Okay. Or you can go online and there are numerous data sets where they have like the country name and the continent name, and then just go and pull in. An easy way of doing it in Excel is with a VLOOKUP, where you basically copy and the function goes and looks for the country name and then goes and inserts the continent. And yeah, if you would like a copy of one of those country and continent data sets, I can post one in the Meetup chat afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I want to kind of refine this so that I can use this on LinkedIn, hopefully. Um, Definitely giving credits, and yeah, it was really cool. Lon Wabo, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Sorry, that was just keep quiet. I think I was gonna cut you off there. I just wanted. I saw one of your visuals was showing. What was it showing now? It was showing happiness and life expectancy. I think it was the last one. Is that correct?
Um, ooh,
I think it was the last one. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it's the
mm,
last one. The happiness and life expectancy.
yes.
I was just wondering, just only because you don't have like the map. I was just wondering, Celestina, in your one, do you see if there's a correlation between, sorry, which countries had like um, what's the word, had a stronger correlation with this? So would it be like Finland, Sweden, South Africa, where if I live longer, I'm still happy in my country, and could that be an influence of because I can afford to live? Sorry, what's the word? I can afford to live comfortably, so I'm happy being older. Or maybe let's say some other country where it's like I'm very poor and I'm living longer and I don't want to live.
Okay, for that there would be you would not just have to check the correlation between happiness and life expectancy. You would also have to check the correlation between GDP and life expectancy. We're going to do a three-way, a multivariate scatter plot. However, I know that there is a strong correlation between happiness and life expectancy. So his graph does make sense.
Yeah.
It's just checking the correlation between life expectancy and GDP.
Oh, okay, cool. No, I just found it interesting what he made. I was wondering like if yeah, what
But
would
I
it
did not investigate it, if that was the question.
yeah. I just was wondering if you did, and like if you found any, yeah, what you found from that.
No, I have no idea. Actually, I'm looking at that now. But
No problem.
yeah.
And then Celestine, just what you said there, like if you had to bring in another dimension, like you called a three-way comparison, what kind of chart or what would be the best way of doing that? I mean, I know you can do that kind of thing more in data science and Python and that, but are there some good options for that kind of thing in Power BI?
Yes, actually, they're normally called multivariate scatter plots, but there are numerous other ways of doing it. Sometimes it's just as simple as taking those two double bar graphs, so you have two bar graphs, and then you just have a trend line of a third variable. So that's an option. Otherwise, what you do is you have those maps like what you did, Carlo, and then you have one variable being like the data point. Your next variable is the size of the data point, and then your third variable is the color of the data point. And then an alternative is that you just have various, I'm trying to think now, but it's like matrices is another way of showing it. Yeah,
Okay.
effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean by like changing the color or the size and that.
Yeah.
And
Um,
actually, then yeah, just mentioning Carlo's map. So Carlo, how did you manage to like well, Celestine, you also had a map. How do you do that kind of map and plotting the data onto the map?
Okay, so when you have a map, regardless of whether you're working Power BI or in a GIS program like Esri, for example, or if you're or AfriGIS in South Africa, or in Looker, you need a locational point. So in this data set, the location point is the country. Otherwise, it can be an address or coordinates. And then you also need a kind of a metric point, in which case it would be something like the number value of the happiness score or like a number value of how much somebody earns. And then you would need a third value for your color, which could be like a number value. And then those three would be your different, those three would be your different metrics.
Okay. But and I mean, how do you actually create that sort of map view?
Okay, let me.
Celestine, can I present quickly?
Yeah, yes, you can.
Power BI is the only thing that I know, and I don't know much about it anyway. But a question that we had earlier was the relationship between GDP and life expectancy. I think there was a third variable that we mentioned.
Just at the beginning, it was GDP and
Life expectancy.
I think it was just happiness, actually. That's the third one, if I'm not mistaken.
Happiness. Let me see. That's ladder score. Let's try it on the x-axis. Oof, definitely. And then maybe what happens if we put it on the y-axis? Also not working. No. No. I'm not sure how I might be able to display that one. But yeah, I mean, Celestine, if you maybe know how to, or if you could actually on yours, perhaps, then we can maybe look into that.
Okay, wait 2 seconds.
No rush.
And then I'll also show you how to do the maps.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so insert. Cool. So here you add a chart. And in the case of the maps, I'm going to use the Google Maps, but on Power BI, it'd be pretty similar. So your location is already set. You can do country name, or you could do a continent. Those are your two options. We're doing country name. Now, to add a size dimension, so you could do something like, but you don't really want to do that because you see how large it is. So no, I think it's colorimetric. Okay, and now what happens is you're making it so that each point has a variation of color. So it's a data point that is governed by the variation of color. And now as you zoom in or out, okay, sorry about how big this is now, but you get an idea of how, like, for example, these countries have very little social support. Europe, as we know, has a lot of social support. And that's how it fades in. And then based on it, you can adjust the color or how the map looks. Yeah, and then there are some, when I previously did geospatial intelligence, there are some amazing map capabilities within those geospatial programs. This is a very limited one, but it is good for what you have. So the alternative, if you want more what I had previously done, where it was like a flat piece of it, or rather where it takes up the country space. Why aren't you doing that now? Color metric. Okay. Fine. Okay, I will figure it out just now probably, but yeah, that's essentially what you're going to do there. Now, to add a chart that is multivariate. Okay. Now you have three things here. Now we go to our log GDP per capita. All right, and you have your happiness score, which is your ladder score. And then finally, the last one was health. What was it? I don't know. I can't remember. Okay. But as you can see, they basically stack on top of each other. And that's how you do multivariate graphs. Or alternatively, you can just change the graph type. Yeah, but those are the three that you would use the most. Otherwise, I like this graph. Oh, it's not going to work yet. Okay, but yeah, then they basically blend together like that.
Would 100% stacked like column chart or area chart work? Because then I almost think like we'd be able to show all three variables in a way that's like easy to understand. So if it's like 100%, then 20% is, I don't know, yeah, whatever 20% is, whatever 30% is. I'm just looking at the ones that you're showing now. I just wonder if it'd be difficult to interpret the data from first glance.
Are you saying you want to say of the 100% of the ladder score, and you try and interpret the data of how much of that percentage of the ladder score is each variable?
No. So I'm just looking at just first glance interpretation. Like when I look at the ones that you created, it's just is it, or I don't know if how the other guys feel. It's just, is it easier to understand it quickly in the way that you in those options that you gave? Like if just looking at it from just, I want to see it just visually. Does the data make sense?
The multivariate didn't make sense to me at first glance. But that's because I don't work with multivariate analyses often, I think.
Yeah, I think the multivariant is always going to be a bit more complicated. Yeah, I'm not sure which is the easier way of looking at it. But I think those line charts do help. You can see the correlation there.
So then, like Celestine, would that something that's naturally, I guess, difficult to interpret? Would that be followed by some sort of documentation to say that, okay, this is a chart that has this and this and this variable and plotted like this, etc., etc.?
Yeah, no. So those are normally things that you would have to include some kind of documentation or training for. They are not normally included within typical data dashboards. You would normally just have like bar graphs, occasionally pie charts, scatter plots, and then line charts to show difference over time. And of course, maps.
Oh, okay. So it's like it would be those unique cases that might need, something that complicated would just have to be followed by some sort of documentation just to make it easier for people to interpret it.
Yeah, you see those graphs more if you do like financial analysis.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah, if you're
then
interested in quantitative analysis for like trading or things like that, you would see those graphs.
okay, cool. And then I remember when I just joined, I know I'm going a bit back here. When I just joined the call, I think you were just explaining, you're explaining the World Happiness Report and its data and what it aims to show and how it does it and stuff. Is it also just best practice whenever, I guess, making a dashboard for a specific whatever it may be for, to have that sort of intro, like I guess just part of the data story and context for whoever maybe the user may be.
Yes, actually, especially like with the World Happiness Report, there is an underlying mathematical model. And if you don't explain to people how you reach the conclusion, they might not trust you. Yeah, especially when you get further along in your analysis, you have to explain which variables you included and which you excluded and why. So it's always important to tell the stakeholders that. Otherwise, if they feel that you ignored something crucial, they might not believe in your data or they might not use your findings.
Okay, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I thought the explanation about those variables, the ones that said explain by, that helped a lot, because when I was looking at the data, I didn't really understand what that meant. But once you explained that, then I thought, yeah, that's a good way of comparing the different factors to know how much they contributed to the overall score. So yeah, I think that definitely helped.
Thank you. Yeah, and then usually with obviously this is just for a fun thing, but if you were actually like clients or people I was working with, there would be a whole like intro session and to make sure that you know like from a data literacy what each of the graphs mean and things like that. So that's something if you ever find yourself in this kind of situation for work or for like teaching this someone about your graphs in like an interview, if this is for your portfolio, it helps to have like some bit of data documentation and a bit of a deep dive. So yeah, that's just tips from someone who's done it.
Cool, thanks. And then just another question. Obviously, a lot of the comparisons are like comparing different countries, and there's a huge number of countries. So it's quite hard to, look at all the countries and try and compare them. So you might want to narrow it down, and I think that's where the maps do help. You can look at a continent or whatever. But what are some of the other ways of like narrowing it down? Like, because the one chart that I did manage to do, I kind of just thought of which countries have a score above 7. So that gave me a list of, a few countries that were like, the top. But what are some of the other ways that you might narrow it down to like a smaller set of countries to focus on?
Something that I didn't do because I listed it as an example in the meetup and I was hoping somebody else would do it is to compare within economic blocks. So
Yeah.
there's BRICS, there's the EU, there's like, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of other ones. To be able to really understand like countries is to look at who their closest trading partners or competitors are, and then to be able to see how the happiness varies within them. So that's one way. I like the idea of the sliding scale. I didn't include a scale in my dashboard, and that's something that is like a weakness of my dashboard. And from that scale, you would basically filter to say all countries that have a ladder score over 7 or under 3 or whatever, and then only look at the data for those and see how they fit. So that would be something that I would critique myself on. Yeah, so that's always something you look in. How effective are your filters? How easy is your text or labeling to read? You can't have a dashboard if the colors aren't consistent, for example, or your labeling isn't very good. That's always something to keep in mind. Yeah, and then that's another one to look at would just be if you can get various years of the World Happiness Report data, because apparently there's more years, and then to compare them and see which countries have improved the most or have gotten worse or better over time. Yeah, so that was something I didn't do, but would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would bring quite a lot more data in. Would be but it would be interesting to see how they compare.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the change over time.
So I just might be digressing a bit here. I'm just wondering about the actual data, right? So you would have it on Google Sheets, and then you would have connected it to your Looker. Then, but then if you were to, what's the word, web scrape, is it possible? I know that I'm quite sure it's possible, but how would you actually get the data in, like through web scraping? So instead of having to download each and every single sheet, so let's say I wanted to look at all the years from now until 2020 or whatever year it is, and I'm trying to compare each year's World Happiness reports. Just general, I don't need like specifics, but general steps of how to actually get the data in and then into Looker. Would I store it in Google Sheets or in Excel in my local laptop, or how do you think would be the best way to do it?
That depends. So if they have the data stored in like CSVs or like Excel spreadsheets online, you could go and download those onto like a drive or just insert them into your own local database. Alternatively, you can scrape them, or if they have an API that you can connect to, that is one way. Obviously, the API and the scraping require Python experience or some form of coding experience. I don't know what languages you know, so that's something to just be aware of. In terms of how you can get the data, a lot of the data is actually available normally for download. So, and it's not uncommon to hear data scientists downloading rather than web scraping. Not everything is a web scrape. But yeah, it is possible to scrape if that's what you're interested in. You would use a library like Beautiful Soup, for example, if you're working with Python. It's known as Beautiful Soup.
Okay, cool. And then just something just something you were saying just now is that I think you were saying it's not common for data science to download, or it is common for data science to download.
There's a lot of stuff. So obviously I had to learn Python and I know how to write web scrapers. Well, how to write web scrapers. So that's not unusual. But not every data set is like scraped. Sometimes it's like there is just one particular data set that you need, and then it doesn't make sense to write the whole function. Other times there's just an API you can connect to. It depends on what the situation is. It's different. Like if you had to go and scrape all of Property 24's data right now, which the legality thereof. But let's say you go and do that, that you would need a web scraper for, because there's no way for you to do it unless you I don't know if they've got an API that you can pay for, but most probably you would have to do it via web scraping, because you can't just copy and paste via spreadsheets the whole website.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks for that.
Yeah. But yeah, that's basically all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for creating that your own work, Carlo. That was really nice. And thank you so much, guys, for attending. I always appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the session. Yeah, it was really good, and learned a lot.
Yeah,